The first time I saw Francine Kettleman hoofing it up my mountain road in her spotless white Range Rover, I knew trouble was coming. She had that pinched face, the kind of haircut that cost more than my chainsaw, and wore a bright pink blazer like she was inspecting a five-star resort instead of crashing my private cabin retreat. Francine wasn't just any suburban busybody. She was the president of the Pine Hollow Ridge Homeowners Association, a title she wielded like a sword. I'm Daryl Elwood, 42, former fireman, now a carpenter who prefers pine trees to people. I bought this cabin 3 years ago, a mile outside the HOA's border. I made sure of that. No dues, no rules, no Francine, or so I thought. She pulled up just as I was splitting firewood. Without so much as a hello, she stepped out and said, "You need to unlock that gate. I have a right to inspect this property. There's been a complaint." I leaned on my axe. "First off, this isn't part of Pine Hollow. Second, you're trespassing. Third, what complaint?" Francine adjusted her sunglasses like she was about to interrogate me. "Your security lights are visible from the road. It's a violation of Pine Hollow's dark sky code." I laughed. "That's a public road." "And again, I'm not in Pine Hollow." "You're adjacent," she snapped. "The HOA has extended jurisdiction to properties within visual proximity. It was voted on last quarter. You don't get to make up borders because you don't like my porch light," I said, walking to the gate. "Now get your SUV off my land before I call the sheriff." Big mistake. She got back in her car and whipped out her phone. 5 minutes later, 2 deputies rolled up the gravel road. I kept calm, pulled out my survey map, and met them at the gate. "She's trespassing," I told them, handing over the deed. "My land starts at that marker. HOA doesn't apply here." Francine was already in full performance mode. "This man is aggressive. He's harassing a community official. I demand he be cited and the gate unlocked." The deputy looked over the documents, then at Francine. "Ma'am, he's right. You're not authorized to be here." She turned red. "But I'm the HOA president, and this isn't HOA land," the deputy said. "You're not exempt from trespassing laws." I watched her jaw tighten like she was chewing nails. The moment they left, I bolted the gate shut and welded a steel crossbar across it. Then I posted a brand new sign. "Private property trespassers will be prosecuted," in bold, red letters. Just for Francine. I figured that'd be the end of it. I underestimated just how far Francine was willing to go. The next morning, I was halfway through replacing a warped beam on the back deck when I heard the drone of an engine creeping up the gravel road again. I shut off the saw and glanced through the trees. A dusty Subaru crawled into view, this time with magnetic signs slapped on the doors. "Pine Hollow Ridge Environmental Oversight Committee." A man and a woman stepped out. They wore matching polo shirts bearing the HOA's crest, some pine tree stitched over a gold triangle, and they held clipboards like they were about to bulldoze a wetland. The man introduced himself with a stiff handshake. "Russell with the Oversight Committee. We're here to conduct a light pollution assessment on behalf of the HOA." "I didn't request anything," I said, stepping down from the deck. "And you're not coming past the gate unless you've got a warrant or a badge." The woman, Lori, according to her name tag, flipped through a stapled packet. "As a bordering resident, you fall under the Secondary Visual Impact Zone, which gives us observational rights under Pine Hollow's updated Environmental Stewardship Charter." "I'm not part of Pine Hollow. You can't just invent zones and pretend they're law," I said, pointing toward the road. "You're trespassing." Russell gave me a rehearsed smile, the kind used by timeshare salesmen and cult recruiters. "We're not here to cause issues, Mr. Elwood. Just a quick survey and we'll be gone." I didn't say a word. I reached behind the gate, grabbed my phone, and started recording. Their expressions shifted. "I've already had one trespasser this week," I said, holding the phone steady. "You've been notified this is private property. If you step past that gate, I will file a formal complaint with the state attorney's office." Lori narrowed her eyes. "We'll note your non-compliance." "You do that," I said, keeping the camera rolling until they turned and left. That night, I installed 2 more trail cameras, one at the bend in the road, another covering the tree line near the south fence. I wasn't paranoid, I just knew the type. People like Francine didn't accept boundaries. They tightened their grip every time you pushed back. 3 days later, I got a letter. Not in the mail. It was taped to the gate with blue painter's tape and sealed in a plastic sleeve like it was supposed to intimidate me with weatherproof confidence. The letter was typed and signed by Francine herself. It stated that due to continued defiance and obstruction, the HOA had voted to initiate a land annexation petition with the county, effective immediately. They claimed my property was a non-conforming parcel, eligible for inclusion under a clause about unincorporated buffer zones. I drove straight to the county recorder's office the next morning. After waiting an hour behind a woman arguing about a drainage easement, I finally got my audience with a clerk named Janet. When I showed her the letter, she squinted like she'd just found mold on her sandwich. "They can't do this," she said. "HOAs can't annex land. Only the county board can redraw zoning lines, and even then, it requires public notices, community hearings, and a unanimous vote by the board." I leaned in. "Has anything like that been filed?" She clicked around on her computer, then shook her head. "Nope, nothing on record." "This letter's a bluff." I asked for copies of the county zoning maps and took them home. Then I filed a formal request for public records from the HOA itself. Under state law, HOA documents have to be provided to any affected party upon request, even if they're not a member. I didn't get a response. What I did get, 6 days later, was a sheriff's deputy on my porch holding a citation. "You've been reported for obstruction of a public utility inspection," he said, clearly uncomfortable. "What utility?" "Fiber optic line expansion." The HOA filed a work order saying they've partnered with the county to run lines through your property. I stared at him. "That's fiction. There's no fiber optic up here and no one's contacted me," he sighed. "I figured as much, but I have to serve the citation." "You'll have to show up in county court." I accepted the paper, but I wasn't worried. Not even close. I had already contacted the county's infrastructure office and confirmed there were no utility projects involving my land. What this meant was clear. Francine had forged a work order and filed a false report with law enforcement. Now we were in criminal territory. I wrote up a full statement, attached the documents I'd collected, and submitted everything to the district attorney's office. Then I called a friend of mine, Marcy Lai, a former prosecutor turned land use attorney. We hadn't talked since I left the city, but the moment she heard the story, she said, "I'll take this for free." Just to watch that woman eat gravel in court. While Marcy began the legal process, I printed out laminated copies of the zoning maps and stapled them to the inside of my gate. I also installed a new motion sensor system that triggered floodlights and a loudspeaker announcement. "You are on private land. Turn around immediately. Law enforcement has been notified." I didn't have to wait long. Less than a week later, around 3 in the morning, my phone buzzed. The trail camera app notified me of movement near the south fence. I opened the feed and saw 3 people with flashlights sneaking along the tree line. One of them carried bolt cutters. Another had a clipboard. They stopped at the fence post and began cutting. I hit the panic button on my control panel. A siren blared from the speakers and lights lit up the entire forest edge like a prison break. The trespassers froze, then scattered. What they didn't know was that I'd already called the sheriff's office, and this time, I had video of the break-in attempt. The next morning, Francine showed up again. This time she was wearing a beige trench coat like she was solving a murder. She stood behind the gate, arms crossed, while I stood on my porch sipping coffee. "This hostility needs to stop," she said. "You sent people to cut through my fence. That's felony trespass." She didn't deny it. "You're making this difficult." "All we want is compliance." "You don't want compliance, you want control," I replied. "You forged documents and used county resources to harass a private citizen. I've already turned everything over to the DA. Her lips twitched. I took a step closer. "Next time anyone from your little coven steps foot on my land, I'll have them arrested." "You're not above the law, Francine." She didn't respond. Just turned and walked back to her car. 2 days later, Marcy called. "You're going to love this. The DA's office is opening an investigation into the HOA. Turns out this isn't the first time they've pulled stunts like this. Apparently, Pine Hollow had tried to annex properties before, usually from older residents who didn't have the resources to fight back. They'd forged utility requests, created fake violations, even threatened to cut off water lines in one case. But this time, they picked the wrong person. By the end of the week, subpoenas were issued. Francine and 2 board members were named in the investigation. The fake work order, the fabricated environmental claims, and the attempted fence breach were all being treated as part of a coordinated harassment campaign. I reinforced the gate one last time: steel brackets, industrial padlock, and a new camera with license plate recognition. I didn't need to say a word to Francine after that. The law was speaking for me now, and for the first time since she drove up my mountain, she stayed gone. The county sheriff's cruiser rolled up my driveway just as the first frost of November settled in. I'd been hauling firewood from the shed, bundled in flannel and expecting a quiet morning. Instead, Deputy Ramirez stepped out, her breath fogging as she approached with a folder tucked under her arm. "Need a minute," she said, her boots crunching over the gravel. I nodded and waved her inside the cabin. She glanced around at the walls lined with tools and topographical maps as I poured 2 mugs of coffee. "This about the HOA?" I asked, handing her a cup. She opened the folder and laid out a document stamped with the county seal. "Francine's HOA filed an emergency injunction in Superior Court claiming your property poses a public hazard. They're trying to get a temporary order for forced inspection." I blinked. Hazard. Based on what? They submitted falsified photos, images of a collapsing structure, exposed wiring, even a fake septic spill, all supposedly taken on your land. Problem is, the timestamps are doctored and the terrain doesn't match your lot. I leaned over the table and studied the pictures. The cabin in the photos wasn't mine. The siding was wrong, the chimney was brick instead of stone, and the trees in the background were lowland scrub, not mountain pine. "They lifted images from a condemned site," I said. "I've seen this place before. It's on the east side of the range, 30 miles from here." Ramirez nodded. "We cross-checked it. You're right. They tried to pass it off as yours in court." I ran a hand through my beard. "That's criminal fraud." "That's why I'm here," she said. "The district attorney just upgraded the investigation. It's no longer civil harassment, it's criminal conspiracy, document falsification, and attempted unlawful entry under false pretenses." I swallowed hard. The game had changed. Later that day, Marcy called with urgency in her voice. "The judge just issued a cease and desist against the entire HOA board. They're barred from making contact with you or stepping within 200 feet of your property line." The board's attorney tried to argue jurisdiction, but the judge wasn't having it. "What else do we have to do?" I asked. "We're filing a motion to have the HOA placed under temporary receivership. If the court grants it, the entire board will be suspended, and a court-appointed manager will take over operations while the investigation unfolds." I stared out the window, watching a hawk circle above the ridge. "They're going to lose everything they built. They built it on threats and intimidation," she said. "This is justice." That night, I set up a new system, a perimeter laser grid linked to a silent alarm that pinged my phone and recorded footage to a cloud server. I didn't trust Francine to stay away, no matter what the court said. The next morning, I drove into town to get supplies. As I stepped into the hardware store, I noticed a bulletin board near the entrance had a new flyer. Emergency, HOA meeting, Pine Hollow Ridge Clubhouse, topic. Unauthorized legal action and board misconduct open to residents. Only I raised an eyebrow. The residents were finally waking up. Later that week, Marcy called again. "You'll like this. 2 board members just flipped. They're cooperating with the investigation. Names: Trevor Dorsey and Margot Lynn. They both gave statements that Francine pushed for the forged documents and that she personally instructed a volunteer group to pressure you into compliance. I set down my coffee. Pressure how? They admitted she ordered the fence-cutting operation. Claimed you were storing hazardous materials and that it was in the public interest to get inside. She's not just corrupt, I said. She's delusional. She's also done. The DA's office is preparing charges: criminal trespass, conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false reports, and misuse of public resources. They're also exploring a civil suit to dissolve the HOA entirely. The next day, I drove down to the county courthouse for the first public hearing on the matter. The courtroom was packed. Residents from Pine Hollow filled the benches, murmuring among themselves. I took a seat in the back, not interested in spectacle, just in seeing it through. Francine entered, flanked by 2 attorneys and wearing a charcoal gray suit. Her expression was brittle, like glass under tension. For the first time, she wasn't in control. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman named Ellery Crane, wasted no time. Before this court is a motion to place the Pine Hollow Ridge HOA under court supervision pending criminal investigation, she said. Evidence has been submitted indicating systemic abuse of power, illegal surveillance, and falsification of public documents. Francine's attorney tried to object, claiming the evidence was circumstantial and motivated by personal vendettas. Judge Crane shut him down with a single raised hand. We have sworn affidavits, verified timestamps, and direct testimony from 2 board members. This is not circumstantial, she said. It is a pattern. Francine remained silent, her hands clenched in her lap. When the hearing ended, the judge granted the motion. The HOA was suspended. A forensic auditor and a temporary administrator would take over. The residents around me seemed stunned, some whispering, a few nodding in grim satisfaction. Outside the courthouse, a local reporter approached me. "Mr. Elwood, you were the one who first challenged the HOA's actions." "Do you have a comment?" I paused, then said, "People forget that the law works both ways. It protects communities, but it also protects individuals. You can't just bully people into submission and wrap it in bureaucracy." Back home, I found a hand-addressed envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a letter, unsigned, written in neat cursive, "Thank you for standing up. We were too scared to do it ourselves." I folded it carefully and set it beside the trail camera footage and court documents, not for revenge, just as a reminder. The following week, the temporary HOA manager released a public report. Under Francine's leadership, over 50 residents had received fabricated violation notices. Several had paid fines that were never reported in the HOA's financials. One family had even sold their home under pressure, believing they were in violation of imaginary setback rules. The community held a new election. None of the old board members even ran. I didn't attend the vote. I didn't need to. The mountain was quiet again. My gate still stood, reinforced and locked, but the tension that had once hung in the trees like smoke had lifted. A few neighbors started waving when they passed on the road. Some even stopped in to ask about building their own off-grid cabins. The fear was gone. The grip had been broken. Francine was indicted on 5 counts and faced trial the following spring. Her attorneys tried to bargain, but the DA wasn't interested in deals. The evidence was airtight, and I just kept working the land, fixing, building, living. Because some gates, once locked, stay that way for good reason. The first real snow came early that year, laying a thick blanket of silence over the ridge. I was up before dawn, clearing the chimney flue and prepping the generator when my phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Marcy had scheduled a deposition for one of the former board members, and she wanted me present. The county clerk's office had reserved a small conference room, and by the time I arrived, Marcy was already inside, arranging files across the table like puzzle pieces. She didn't look up as I entered, just pointed to a chair and said, "He's nervous. Don't interrupt him when he starts talking." A few minutes later, a man stepped in, mid-50s, average build, windbreaker zipped to the throat. I recognized him from the HOA flyers that used to circulate in town. His name was Leonard Haynes, former treasurer and the last of the board members who hadn't been charged, but hadn't spoken either. He sat down, avoided my eyes, then cleared his throat hard enough to sound painful. "I didn't know where else to go after the subpoenas started flying," Leonard said. "But I can't hold this anymore, not after what I saw." Marcy clicked her pen. "You're under oath, go ahead." Leonard stared at the table. Francine had a back-channel arrangement with a property developer, names Halston and Crest. They wanted to buy up parcels on the north side of the ridge and convert them into a luxury resort. Problem was, most of the land was protected or unincorporated. So she came up with a workaround: get the HOA to annex the properties, then enforce compliance violations until the owners had no choice but to sell. I shifted in my chair. "You're saying she weaponized the HOA to force people off their land?" He nodded once. "She ran it like chess. If someone pushed back, she buried them in fines. If they resisted those, she'd fabricate an emergency fire hazard, contaminated well, whatever, and file for emergency access. The rest of us, we went along. She said it was legal. She said the county was on her side." Marcy pushed a folder toward him. "We already found evidence of the forged fire reports, but this development connection, that's new. Do you have proof?" Leonard reached into his coat and pulled out a flash drive. "These are copies of HOA board minutes from private meetings, not the ones we posted publicly, the real ones. Francine ordered me to delete them after the last vote failed. I didn't." The room went quiet for a few seconds. Marcy took the drive, plugged it into her laptop, and began scrolling. Her eyebrows rose slowly. "I can't believe this," she said. "There's a whole section here outlining the relocation timeline for unincorporated homeowners. They even have projected sale values based on probable compliance defaults." Leonard looked up then. His eyes were bloodshot. "The worst part is, they already succeeded in one case. Elderly couple, no kids, lived out here since the 70s. Francine hit them with a noise complaint from a non-existent neighbor, then filed a landscaping violation for a tree that had been on their property longer than she'd been alive. They left in August, sold under pressure for a third of what it was worth." I stood slowly. "You're willing to testify to all of this?" He nodded. "I've got nothing left to protect." Within 24 hours, the DA's office filed new charges: racketeering, fraud with intent to extort, and conspiracy to falsify county records. Francine was arrested at her home before sunrise, still in a silk bathrobe, and taken into custody without incident. The news broke on the local radio before the TV stations caught up. By noon, Pine Hollow Ridge was the most infamous HOA in the state. The court-appointed manager released the full audit the next week. It revealed over $70,000 in unaccounted funds, most of it funneled through a shell landscaping company tied to Halston and Crest. Residents were stunned. Some were furious. Others quietly relieved. The HOA had bullied them for so long they'd stopped questioning anything. The county board voted unanimously to revoke Pine Hollow Ridge's special enforcement status. That meant they could no longer issue citations, enforce fines, or conduct inspections without direct oversight from the county itself. In practice, the HOA was now a hollow title with no legal teeth. I got a letter from the county that day, certified and stamped. All complaints filed against my property were officially expunged. The citation about the fake utility inspection was voided, and the false emergency injunction request was withdrawn with prejudice. It was over, but I wasn't done yet. I took the documents, the deposition transcripts, and every piece of photographic evidence and sent it in a sealed envelope to the office of the Attorney General. I wrote a short note explaining what had happened and how close it had come to working. A month passed. Snow came down in sheets. I rebuilt the south fence with steel posts and reinforced mesh, not because I expected more trouble but because it felt good to finish things with my own hands. Then one morning a letter arrived. Attorney General's seal. Inside was a single sentence: "Thank you for your vigilance." A statewide review of HOA oversight procedures has been initiated. That was enough. A few weeks later, I was stacking lumber for a new shed when a battered pickup rolled up the road. A man stepped out. Younger, maybe in his 30s, with a quiet look. "You Daryl?" he asked, holding a rolled blueprint. "Who's asking?" "Name's Carter. My folks used to live out here. They sold last year. Pressure from the HOA. I want to buy the place back and rebuild. Someone said you'd know how to keep them off my back." I set the hammer down. "You came to the right place." We walked the property line together as the sun dipped below the ridge. He pointed out where the old house had stood, and I gave him tips on how to file the right easement forms to keep future associations out. I showed him where to find the zoning maps, how to register a no-access covenant with the county, and which recorder's office clerk to talk to if he wanted things done without red tape. By the time he left, he had a folder full of papers and a list of names. I watched his truck disappear down the hill, tires crunching over the frozen gravel. That night, I walked out to the gate one last time. The original sign was weather-worn now, but still legible. I replaced it with a new one hand-carved from cedar. "This land is not for sale, not for annexation, not for intimidation." I stood there for a while, listening to the wind whistle through the trees. No cars, no voices, just the sound of a place that had earned its peace. The cabin lights glowed behind me, and for the first time since Francine's SUV had broken the quiet months ago, I felt completely still. No more bluff letters. No more phony inspections. No more trespassers with clipboards and fake credentials. The gate was locked. And this time, it would stay that way.